That's right. No one in here at the moment. The police. Got it. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Show your chance. Yeah.
Somewhere in Essex, England, there's a house on a quiet residential street where, for 4 years, the neighbors had no reason to worry. The curtains moved. The lights came on and off. Occasionally, there were deliveries. The bins were put out. From the outside, the house on Pump Hill in Great Baddow looked like any other house occupied by any other family. But John and Lois McCullough, the retired couple who had lived in that house for years, who their neighbors and doctors and family members believed were simply getting older and keeping to themselves, had been dead since the summer of 2019. Their bodies were inside the house. John was sealed inside a brick enclosure in his study, built by hand from masonry blocks ordered online 2 days after he died. Lois was folded into a wardrobe upstairs, wrapped to contain the smell. Their youngest daughter, Virginia, was living with them, not in grief, not in denial, not in some dissociative psychological collapse that might offer a frame of explanation. With meticulous, deliberate, sustained calculation. For 4 years, she answered their phones, sent birthday cards in their names, texted their sisters, her own sisters, as her dead mother, called her father's pension company pretending to be him, collected nearly £150,000 in pensions, benefits, and fraudulent credit. When police finally broke down the door in September 2023, Virginia McCullough was calm. "I knew this would come," she told officers. "I deserve my punishment." What investigators found inside that house shocked detectives who described themselves as among the most experienced in Essex, and what this case reveals about the psychology of premeditated deception, planned not over days or weeks, but over months and then sustained over years, is something the criminal justice system had rarely seen in quite this form. This is the full story.
Murder against Jonathan McCullough and Lois McCullough.
Yeah,
Okay?
that's what he's.
Right, okay.
Yep, okay. Obviously, I'll
What about
say,
your mum?
a little bit more complicated. Upstairs, there were about 5 wardrobes.
Yep.
I slipped spile of those into his drink. He only drank probably about half of 2. But yeah, when I went in the morning, this was before my mother. When I went in the morning, early hours, I got up about half an hour early, about 6 o'clock in the morning. Came in and he was gone. I did know that this would kind of come eventually. It's proper that I serve my punishment.
John McCullough had spent his career as a business studies lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University. He was 70 years old in 2019, in retirement. He was in poor health, living with hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and other conditions. He was described by those who knew him as possibly on the autism spectrum, a gentle, academic man who had worked hard his whole life. Lois McCullough was 71. She suffered from anxiety and agoraphobia, a fear of the outside world that had, over the years, made her increasingly dependent on the home environment she knew. She had traits of obsessive-compulsive disorder. In practical terms, she rarely left the house. The couple had 5 daughters. Virginia was the youngest. By 2019, all of Virginia's sisters had long since moved out of the family home and built independent lives. Virginia had not. She was 31 years old, living rent-free in her parents' house in Great Baddow, telling them she was pursuing a career as an artist, that the investment in her future would eventually be financially rewarding for the whole family. It was a lie. Virginia McCullough was not studying art. She was not building a career. According to the court proceedings and the evidence later presented at sentencing, she was gambling. She was spending. She was taking out loans and credit cards in her parents' names without their knowledge. And by the time the summer of 2019 arrived, she had accumulated almost £60,000 in debt. Most of it in her parents' names, most of it hidden from them behind forged letters and fabricated stories about financial scams. Her sisters later described her as someone who had always been socially awkward, a compulsive liar, someone for whom the construction of alternative realities was not a crisis response, but a habit. What nobody knew was how far that habit was about to go. The murder of John and Lois McCullough was not impulsive. According to evidence presented at Chelmsford Crown Court, Virginia McCullough began planning to kill her parents in March 2019, 3 months before the murders took place. She began accumulating prescription drugs, stockpiling them. In May 2019, she purchased a knife. She also bought implements specifically designed to crush medication into powder, the kind of equipment that has no innocent explanation in this context. The court heard that in the weeks before the murders, Virginia had used her father as what prosecutors described as a guinea pig, testing doses of medication on him to understand the effect. She was not improvising. She was calibrating. On June 17, 2019, Virginia prepared a cocktail of crushed prescription drugs and administered it to both her parents. John McCullough's medication was mixed into an alcoholic drink. He received a lethal dose. He died. Lois McCullough did not drink alcohol. Her dose was not sufficient to kill her. Virginia woke the following morning to find her father dead, and she found her mother still alive. With her father already dead, Virginia faced a decision that, for most people, would represent an impossible threshold. Her mother was alive. Her mother would soon realize what had happened. Everything would unravel. Virginia McCullough went into her mother's room while Lois lay in bed listening to the radio. She bludgeoned and stabbed her mother to death. Afterwards, Virginia went to her local GP surgery to seek treatment for a cut on her hand, a wound she had sustained during the attack on her mother. She offered no explanation for the injury that would raise immediate alarm. Then she drove into Chelmsford. She purchased plastic gloves and sleeping bags using her father's credit card. She returned home, and she began to build. 2 days after the murders, Virginia McCullough placed an online order with B&Q, a large British hardware retailer. The order included 40 building blocks, cement, and sharp sand. In subsequent days, further orders followed: sellotape, a stepladder, and additional materials. In her father's downstairs study, she constructed what the judge at sentencing would later describe as a makeshift mausoleum. Masonry blocks stacked together and secured with white filler, forming a rectangular enclosure in the corner of the room. John McCullough's body was placed inside, sealed within the structure. The space between the blocks was filled to contain what was inside. Her mother's body was taken upstairs and placed in a double wardrobe. It was wrapped in material, layered carefully to suppress the smell. Then Virginia McCullough began the second phase of what she had planned. She had to make sure nobody came looking. What followed across the next 4 years was a sustained, multi-layered campaign of impersonation and fraud that investigators would later describe as among the most elaborate they had encountered. Virginia sent text messages to family members. Her own sisters signed off as her mother. Birthday cards were sent via an online printing service, pre-formatted with her parents' names. She used multiple SIM cards to contact family members and others, rotating them to avoid detection. She called family members on the phone, speaking as her mother. She spoke to at least one sister on the phone, pretending to be both of her dead parents. She telephoned her father's pension company and impersonated him to keep payments flowing. She called her parents' GP surgery, impersonating her mother, managing appointments and queries. She even made calls to police on occasion, pretending to be Lois McCullough reporting trivial neighborhood matters, maintaining the fiction of a living, engaged resident. All the while, she was collecting state pensions, winter fuel payments, credit card transactions, bank withdrawals. By the time she was arrested, she had taken almost £150,000 through the fraud enabled by her parents' deaths. A significant portion of it went on gambling, £21,193 confirmed as lost through online betting sites. The rest on shopping, personal expenses, and sustaining the life she was living in that house. The COVID-19 pandemic, which arrived in early 2020, was, as the court noted, convenient. Restrictions on movement and social contact meant that family members had reduced ability to visit or check on John and Lois in person. What might have raised concerns in normal times could be explained away more easily. Virginia's carefully maintained communication replaced the physical contact that had previously existed. The house itself began to deteriorate. Neighbors noticed the garden becoming overgrown. The property grew gradually more cluttered, more unkempt. But nobody came inside. Nobody had reason to. For 4 years, it held. In September 2023, a GP at John and Lois McCullough's surgery noticed something that finally pushed them to act. John McCullough had not collected a regular prescription. Virginia had canceled multiple medical appointments on her parents' behalf over recent months. The GP raised concerns with the safeguarding team at Essex County Council. The council contacted Essex Police on September 13th. Officers initially approached the case as a missing persons inquiry. They spoke to Virginia, who told them her parents were traveling and would return in October. The officers were not satisfied. On September 15th, Essex Police executed a search warrant at the house on Pump Hill. They broke down the door. Virginia McCullough was inside. As officers entered with a taser trained on her, she raised her hands and said, "I'll cooperate. I'll cooperate." When asked whether there was anything in the property that police should know about, she nodded. "Yes, there is." She was arrested for murder. As the handcuffs were applied, she said, "I knew this would come. I deserve my punishment." She then told officers there was a bank card and a handbag inside the house, and that there were a large number of transactions connected to it that related to her parents' money. John McCullough's body was discovered the following day, on September 16th, sealed inside the brick structure in the study. Lois was found in the wardrobe upstairs. Both had been dead since the summer of 2019.
Murder weapon is upstairs in the living room, kitchen knife. It's in the middle of the brown carpet, against the wall, opposite the shelves. So there are two long white shelves, so opposite where that wall is, that's where the knife is. So the next bit is very hard to talk about. That's probably the most grisly detail. So on the ground floor, underneath the stairs, there's a few like storage boxes and things. And in the middle, I think it's in one of the boxes or in a bag or something. If you want me to shush after this, it's fine. But every bit helps. You will find forensic bits helpful. There's a hammer. I know, but I'm trying to help so you find everything. It's in the middle, underneath the stairs. It will still have blood on it. It's rusted, but it will still have blood traces on it.
Virginia McCullough was charged with 2 counts of murder and appeared before magistrates on September 18th, 2023. She was remanded in custody at Chelmsford Crown Court on July 4th, 2024, 5 years to the month after the murders. Virginia McCullough entered guilty pleas to both counts of murder. She did not contest what she had done. She had, in a sense, confessed the moment police arrived. At sentencing on October 11th, 2024, Judge Johnson addressed her directly. He told her she had robbed her parents of their dignity and death, that her conduct amounted to a fundamental violation of the trust that should exist between parents and their children, that the details of the case shocked and horrified even the most experienced murder detectives. He sentenced Virginia McCullough to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 36 years, reduced from 40 by 4 years as credit for her guilty plea. She will not be considered for parole until she is well into her 70s. Detective Superintendent Rob Kirby, who led the investigation for Essex Police, described her as an intelligent manipulator who had killed her parents without thought for them or for those who would continue to suffer from their loss. He said the wider family had been left devastated, not only by the deaths themselves, but by 4 years of being deceived. For years of receiving texts and birthday cards and phone calls from someone they believed was their mother. For years of being kept from grieving. The McCullough case sits in a category almost entirely its own. There are cases where people kill out of fear or anger or desperation. Cases where the psychology of the perpetrator is rooted in trauma or untreated illness. Cases where investigators find complexity and ambiguity in the motive. This is not one of those cases. Virginia McCullough planned to kill her parents 3 months in advance. She tested poisons on her father before administering the lethal dose. She ordered construction materials 2 days after the murders. She maintained an impersonation of 2 dead people to their own family for 4 years. She answered their phones, sent their birthday cards, spoke in their voices. She did all of this to avoid a debt she had created through gambling and fraud. To protect a life she had been living at her parents' expense, built entirely on deception. John McCullough was 70, a retired lecturer, a man in poor health who trusted his youngest daughter to help manage his affairs. Lois was 71, housebound by anxiety, dependent on her daughter, listening to the radio in bed on a June morning when her own child came into the room. They're the ones this story is about. The sentencing judge said that the family could not now begin to find their way forward. The sisters who had been receiving texts from a dead woman. The relatives who had been told their parents were on holiday. The people who had not been allowed to grieve because the grief had been stolen from them too. Virginia McCullough told police she knew the day would come, that she deserved her punishment. It came. After 4 years,